Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and one of the themes of today is, shockingly enough, reasonable Republicans. Don't it? Now, they're of course countered by unreasonable Republicans, and they're fighting back against them, but that's not news. And of course, we're going to balance all of that out with Sarah Palin. So there'll be plenty of unreasonableness on the show. But I'm going to start with an unlikely hero here, Judge Napolitano on Fox News. He's going to argue that what the Constitution says clearly is somebody should be tried where they committed their crime. Of course, he's going to run into resistance from Bill O'Reilly and to some degree Brit Hume as well. So let's check out that clip. Clip number 9.
If the Bush administration had declared war on al-Qaeda, a terrorist group, then you wouldn't have the opinion you have now.
That's right. There was no declaration of war.
So because there is no declaration of war, you say that any terrorist act, and surely 9/11 fits that bill, right? Surely 9/11 fits the bill of terrorist act.
But it is not I who is saying it. It's the Constitution that is saying it.
I don't care about the Constitution. The Constitution isn't here. You're here. Don't be a pinhead. 9/11 was a terrorist act, was it not?
It was an act in which individual people, not a government, slaughtered innocents in America.
Was it a terrorist act? Was it designed to terrorize the American population?
Yes, of course it was.
So, the guy arrested is arrested in Pakistan.
Right.
Right? So, why is he entitled to come to New York City to be tried in a civilian criminal court if he's arrested in Pakistan?
Because the document you don't want me to talk about says when the government is going to prosecute you, it must do so in the place where the alleged harm was caused.
What I don't get is what's the upside? And I've been scouring the columns of various people opining about this to see if somebody makes a good argument for doing it. And I really haven't heard one. Andrew Napolitano makes the argument that it's constitutional to do it that way. I'm not certain I agree with that, but I'll leave that to him.
Yeah, but there's no leaving it to him. What does the Constitution say? It says you should try the guy where the crime was committed. But I mean, the funny thing is you don't even have to go to the Constitution on this. It is such a core principle of not just American, but Western jurisprudence that we try people where they committed the crime. That their argument is laughable. And so Brit Hume says at the end there, I don't really see a good argument for it, except for the fact that it's absolutely true. But I'll say that's the opinion of Judge Napolitano on the Constitution. And, O'Reilly asked him the question. He said, why? And Napolitano answered it. And there it is. That's why. That's why you bring him to New York, because the crime happened in New York. It's so obvious that it's comical they argue against it. So, of course, O'Reilly, since he doesn't like those facts, says, I don't care about the Constitution. Don't be a pinhead. If you care about the Constitution, or you want to quote him the Constitution to answer his question, well, then obviously you're being a pinhead. So, it's a shocking day in America, but score one for Judge Napolitano for actually reading the Constitution. Nicely done. Look, I'm always looking at the upside of things. You see, I'm not going after O'Reilly or Hume. I'm giving credit to Napolitano. But that's only because I'm the most fair man in America. All right, so now we move forward. Another Republican being reasonable. And again, this is now like the 8th time he's done it. And another bewildering turn of events here. David Frum, one of the top neocons in the country, a former speechwriter for George Bush. Well, I mean, no one wanted to attack Iraq more than David Frum did. And, has an opinion piece on CNN here saying, look, you morons on the right-wing side. He didn't use the word morons. He's saying, look, you're going to drive this party off a cliff, man. Now, you killed our chance of winning the 23rd District in New York, which, by the way, I was wrong on. I was off by 20 years. I was saying that the Republicans hadn't lost that seat since 1852. My bad. They hadn't lost it since 1872. Okay, so they had kept it for all that time, and they lost it. And Frum says, hey, you know what? You might want to pay attention. That's a really bad way to go. In fact, in all 5 of the special elections right now that have happened since the 2008 elections, those are not the governor's elections, but the special elections for Congress. Democrats have won every single one of them. So now the conservatives are promising to do what they did in the 23rd District in the whole state of Florida, where they're running Mark Rubio against Charlie Crist. Charlie Crist, a fairly popular governor of Florida, running for the Senate now, the United States Senate, and Rubio is the extreme right-winger, right? So, of course, all the national figures in the conservative movement have said, oh, Rubio rocks. Let's go take down Charlie Crist. He's popular. He might actually win. And so David Frum is like, no. Remember, we want to be in power. We want to invade other countries. But if we can't do it if we're not in power, what's the point of, even if you think you're right, what's the point of being a permanent minority? And he has a quote here from a Republican that was great. He asked these, now we're taking his word for it, but he asked this gathering of young conservatives, he said, all right, look, if you don't want to do the bailouts, for example, because you criticized the bank bailouts, and you don't want to do the stimulus spending, okay, well, the economy was crashing, so what's your alternative? Because if you want to be in power and you want to run the government, you have to have real ideas, right? And give Frum credit for at least trying to come up with ideas. So he says, so what would have been your alternative? And of course, crickets, not a word. And then until finally one of the guys says, I guess it's lucky that we weren't in power. Well, it's certainly lucky for the rest of us you weren't in power when Obama took over. But that is not a way to govern. That is not a plan. So now Frum is saying, look, don't be stupid. We have this thing locked up in Florida. If we run Charlie Crist, please don't go and ruin it by bringing this Rubio guy in who's going to lose Florida for no damn reason. And the title of his piece on CNN is Republicans Heading for a Bloodbath in Florida. All right, but look, again, I'm a score one for Frum here. So I'm looking at it on the upside. A couple of reasonable Republicans popping up here and there. And they might not be reasonable in other things. We might really disagree with them. But the question is, can you have a reasonable debate? Or are they, off the deep end? And Frum, in this case, not off the deep end. Now, look at this. Third one, Federalist Society. They went and looked up the Federalist Society website to see what it says about filibusters, and they hadn't changed it since 2003. And of course, in 2003, George Bush is president, and they think the Democrats possibly filibustering his judicial nominees is outrageous, right? And unacceptable. So Federalist Society, if you don't know, is the top conservative legal group, okay? And that's where they get together and plot their fun conservative legal plans. How do I know? I went to a meeting a long time ago, back when I was a conservative, okay? And some people there were very, very smart. Some people were totally cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Okay, so anyway, Federalist Society gets challenged on this. They say, well, it's funny that you had that view before. Do you still have that view? But look at this. Apparently they do. And they've sent a letter, at least Manuel Miranda, who's one of the top conservatives there in that organization, sent a letter to the Republican senators saying, hey, listen, you got to be careful in how you use this filibuster. You can't throw it around, especially for judicial nominees, because the conservative point of view is that the president gets to make those decisions and that elections have consequences and we can't interfere in the president's authority. We argued that under Bush. We should still maintain that to a large degree under Obama. They say, of course, under terrible circumstances or extraordinary circumstances, and he mentions like Cass Sunstein. Okay, I don't agree with that part, obviously. That might change, but you guys are throwing around willy-nilly, and it's just a bad idea, and it's not really conservative. And so, of course, the Republicans in the Senate are like, who's this guy, Miranda? We don't believe in Miranda rights anyway. What is this? No, of course, filibuster, straight ahead, because that's coming up on some judicial nominees for Obama right now. Okay, but nonetheless, score one for the Federalist Society, being somewhat principled there. It's bizarre world. It's an upside-down world today. All right, so let's get back to reality. Sarah Palin, she's done it again. So there's a Newsweek cover featuring her, and they've used, of course, her book Going Rogue is out now, so everybody's talking about it, and that's why Newsweek has the cover. And it says, how do you solve a problem like Sarah? She's bad news for the GOP and for everybody else too, referring to the polls and how she's not doing well and it leading the party in the wrong direction, etc. But that's not the issue, apparently. Apparently the issue is her picture. And they took a picture from Runner's World, the August 2009 issue, where she's dressed, as you can see, in sneakers, and she's got a jogging outfit on, but randomly seems to have pantyhose on along with it. I don't know why. I'm into it, but it seems like a curious choice. But and then she's got the American flag and a couple of blackberries. She, of course, finds this wildly inappropriate. Even though she took the picture, and it was also on the cover of another magazine. But she argues that it's out of context. Let me give you her full quote on this. She says, "The choice of photo for the cover of this week's Newsweek is unfortunate. When it comes to Sarah Palin, this news magazine," and she put news in quotes, "has relished focusing on irrelevant rather than the relevant. The Runner's World magazine one-page profile for which this photo was taken was all about health and fitness, a subject to which I am devoted and which is critically important to this nation. The out-of-context Newsweek approach is sexist and oh so expected by now. If anyone can learn anything from it, it shows you why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, gender, or color of skin. The media will do anything to draw attention, even if out of context." I don't know where the color of skin came into play here. I don't know what happened there, but she's, as usual, without hesitation, dealing the sexism card from the bottom of the deck. Okay, I mean, the minute there's an opportunity to throw sexist out there, she takes it every time. Anna Kasparian.
Yes. Look, I'm not saying that this picture is sexist or not, but she has a point when it comes to the context. Why are they using a picture of her in her jogging outfit for the cover? Why couldn't they use the millions of other pictures that they have of her wearing a suit or looking professional? I mean, I just think that it was a misjudgment editorially.
Interesting. Okay, so Princess Kasparian standing up. No, Casper. I was AK-47 coming out strong, standing up for women. And look, let me give you John Meacham's excuse for it, and then let's talk it out. Okay, John Meacham is the editor of Newsweek, and he says, "We chose the most interesting image available to us to illustrate the theme of the cover, which is what we always try to do. We apply the same test to photographs of any public figure, male or female. Does the image convey what we are saying? That is a general, neutral standard." Okay, so now who's right, John Meacham or Sarah Palin or Anna? I'm going with Anna on this one. Okay, do I think it's sexist? I wouldn't go that far, right? I mean, that's an interesting word. It's a loaded word, etc. But it is a curious choice by Newsweek to put that picture up on that cover when they're talking about her book. Does it have anything to do with running? Does it have anything to do with fitness? Does it have anything to do with her being in a jogging outfit? No. And if, like, here, I'll give you a perfect example. Have they run questionable covers on guys before? Absolutely, right? But if Bush came out with his memoirs, and there was controversial stuff in it or whatever, and the Newsweek cover was him in a jogging outfit, you'd be like, what's that all about? Why is he in a jogging outfit? It doesn't make any sense, right? So here's where I'm calling BS on Newsweek. They knew it would provoke a reaction. Of course it was going to provoke a reaction, and they wanted that reaction. They wanted the attention. Now, they wanted the attention. Does that mean that it is then, hence, sexist? No, it's just weird. You know, if they had put the Bush picture up in a jogging outfit, that'd be weird, but I don't think that'd be because he's a guy. Have they ever put up a picture of Hillary Clinton in a jogging outfit? No. I mean, is it because she's attractive? Yeah, maybe. But if it was an attractive guy, would they do something similar? Would they had a picture of him with his shirt off? I mean, they put up Obama's picture on the beach. That was JR. Obama's picture on the beach running around. So was that sexist? No. So now they're trying to capture the attention. Now, the second reason why I wouldn't call it sexist is because of what Sarah Palin said earlier. Now, this was before she entered the race. She was talking about Hillary Clinton running for president. She was in, funny enough, a Newsweek summit on women and leadership. And here's what she said about how Hillary Clinton shouldn't be whining about attacks on her in regards to her being a woman. Let's watch.
When you look at the coverage, when you listen to the conversations, what do you see?
Well, you know, I think fair or unfair, and I do think it is a more concentrated criticism that Hillary gets on so many fronts. I think that's unfortunate. But fair or unfair, I think she does herself a disservice to even mention it, really. I mean, you got to plow through that. You have to know what you're getting into.
Really?
Which I say this with all due respect to Hillary Clinton and to her experience and to her passion for changing the status quo also. But when I hear a statement like that coming from a woman candidate with any kind of perceived whine about that excess criticism or, maybe a sharper microscope put on her, I think, man, that doesn't do us any good. Women in politics, women in general, wanting to progress this country. I don't think it bodes well for her, a statement like that, because again, fair or unfair, it is there. I think that's reality, and I think it's a given. I think people can just accept that she is going to be under that sharper microscope. So be it. I mean, work harder, prove yourself to an even greater degree that you're capable, that you're going to be the best candidate, and that, of course, is what she wants us to believe at this point. So it bothers me a little bit hearing her bring that attention to herself on that level.
Oh, that's ironic. That's rich. It bothers me to hear her bringing that kind of attention to herself. She's got to realize that there's a sharper microscope, and hey, so be it. Just work harder. You don't want that perceived whine, because that hurts all women in politics. And then that was about Hillary Clinton. Now when it's about her, sexist, 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 sexist. At every given opportunity. Gosh, she's such an enormous hypocrite. So the bottom line here is, Newsweek, I'm not buying what you're selling in terms of why you put that on the cover, right? But Sarah Palin, enough with the sexist nonsense. Young Turks.
MVPs.
All right, back on the Young Turks. This show has had a couple of themes here. One is the reemergence of some small amount of reasonable Republicans, which is a very welcome sign. And then the second theme apparently is Newsweek. We had Jonathan Alter of Newsweek on earlier in the program, and then we talked about Newsweek's cover on Sarah Palin, and now we have Ari Melber on to talk about columnists that Newsweek is using without properly attributing where he's from, and we'll tell you why that's so important in a second. Ari Melber of The Nation magazine, welcome back to the Young Turks.
Thank you.
It's good to have you, man. All right, so tell us what this article is, who wrote it, give us the background first.
Well, I was flipping through Newsweek in print, if you can believe that. And after all the columns in the front, they have these longer articles in the middle, and there was one that just had all of these crazy arguments saying that Barack Obama could have won a lot more Republican votes for the stimulus if he had only included tax cuts, which is weird because he did include $280 billion in tax cuts in the stimulus, and that Obama fatigue is sweeping the country, and just a lot of other stuff that sounded more like attacks than reporting. It was a long piece. And the byline was for Yuval Levine, who it said was an editor at a magazine and a fellow at a public policy center. And I did a very minor amount of digging, nothing special, and found out he also was a former senior White House aide to George W. Bush. And Newsweek has got him covering and analyzing the Obama era and telling us a couple of things about him, but not really the main thing. And I asked Newsweek why that is, and they said that's because all their readers already know Yuval Levine's background. So that was the crux of my piece, basically saying that's crazy, and Newsweek owes obviously a better explanation because that makes no sense, but also more transparency for their readers.
Ari, I don't know why you question that explanation. I was just talking to someone the other day about Yuval Levine, and they're like, oh, come on, who doesn't know his background? Who the hell is Yuval Levine? No one knows who he is. I mean, that's a comical explanation by Newsweek.
Yeah, and as a writer, it's a funny thing because sometimes you're in these situations and you have to figure out whether you want to just completely say that they appear to be lying, right? I don't think that an educated, knowledgeable person who works for a news magazine really would have any way to believe that Yuval Levine's a household name. So when they say it is, it sounds like a lie. I didn't write that, though, to be fair, in my journalism in writing it up. I just asked the questions to suggest that this was crazy.
Okay, so let's go to the larger issue here. How are they, if you don't know what's going on and you just come to this article in the middle of Newsweek, are you seeing that as an article or a column? Is it even clear that it's an editorial or not?
It's not clear. In their response, they said our readers can tell that this is an argued essay and not an article. I encourage anyone to go pick up a copy of Newsweek. I couldn't tell, and I spend too much time on this stuff. It's not labeled that way, and this, in the bigger picture, as you're saying, Cenk, is coming at a time when trust in the news media is at a 20-year low in this country, when we have outlets like Fox News who are free to give their opinion. I'm all for that. I'll always defend their right to speak, but who have built an entire business model around pretending that they're objective while acting as a political opinion and political operation, most famously recently attacked by the White House for it, finally. So it comes at a time when I do think readers and viewers have a lot of questions about the media, and it's really not helpful when, again, why does it matter? Newsweek has over 1 million readers. It's a top magazine, and their people appear all over television. They have influence, and I don't think in this instance they're wielding it responsibly.
So how should they handle it, Ari? I mean, when we open up a magazine or a newspaper now, should things be clearly labeled article or editorial? And if it's an editorial, should we always know where he's from, et cetera, to get the sense of his perspective?
Yes. I mean, I think opinion and news should be distinguished clearly in the section. And I think people in these important roles who increasingly have conflicts of interest should make every best effort to disclose them. I mean, the irony here being that Mr. Levine did have 2 pieces of information under his name, that he was an editor at a different magazine and that he was at a policy center. That doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't tell us as much as knowing that he worked in the Bush White House. Then when he tells us about Obama fatigue, we can factor that in. I'm all for him being in the conversation. As I wrote, it makes it more interesting that the guy served in the White House. I like listening to people who've been in the White House, even if I disagree with them. They have a view. It's very odd that both he and Newsweek wanted to hide that. So to your question, those things should be up front.
So, let's put aside Yuval for a second here, because I'm with you. I think that if it's an editorial, it's a perfectly fine editorial. I mean, I don't think his facts are right, but he's a conservative, so I've come to expect that. But as long as it's clearly labeled editorial, so what? But, Ari, as we were talking, I'm thinking, is there a middle ground between editorial and article? Is there analysis? Is that a different breed? And how should a magazine like Newsweek handle something that's analysis, where you have to say, okay, this is right and this is wrong? You see what I'm saying by that? It's a little middle ground.
Yeah, I think that middle ground for me depends on whether it is advocacy or attempted objective work. It might be objective and analytical in saying the stimulus is working or not, and here are arguments why. But that's distinct from someone who took a stance against the stimulus or for it and now is making their case again. In war coverage, we had a lot of people who came out for the Iraq War and then would go around analyzing it, and we didn't really get a heads up or reminder that they're invested in defending the war, which is why a lot of the media was slow to deal with the problems in Iraq and the problems in finding WMD. They were invested in a narrative. And so I think anyone who ever wrote, this is not how we do it today, but we could, anyone who ever really endorsed a policy, that could be indicated. I think it's relevant.
Yeah, and the more we talk about it, on the TV side, I've always been very clear on it. Of course, Fox News should label themselves a Fox Opinion, and we have zero problems with it. And, you mentioned that earlier, and I think it's easy to say Keith Olbermann does an opinion show, and you can say opinion/analysis, however you want to call it. So do we, right? But that MSNBC's news side is still news. They're not propaganda for the Democrats or anything along those lines, as Fox is. But in magazines and in print, I'm not sure that I'd given it enough thought. Now I'm beginning to think, as we talk it through, that it should be just the facts, ma'am, analysis, and editorial, that there's a spectrum there, and that once you clearly label which section it goes in, then I don't have any problem at all.
Yeah, and I think readers just want to know where people are coming from. And there's a lot of skepticism because, again, the conflicts of interest are worse. So you have reporters who play different roles. You have reporters who are invited on television ostensibly to give what you called analysis, but then are often pressed to take positions. And that might happen, and the key then is to have some record for that. And there are actually some academic studies that look at how pundits and people in the prediction business generally are very bad and have very low accountability, because the things that get you published and invited on shows don't correlate much with being right. I mean, Paul Krugman's written, many columns complaining about that on the both economic and foreign policy front. We didn't get a new class of war pundits to help us through, say, the Afghanistan buildup or these other issues. It's the same class just about of pundits and all of their endorsements of these past failed policies. Now, that's a kind of a bigger picture thing, because it's not just labeling, but I do think that more disclosures help as a general rule.
Yeah, my final thought on this is that, sometimes I'll see Associated Press stories that drive me crazy because of the assumptions that they make in there. But if they label an analysis, then I say, okay, look, I'm going to break this apart as to why I think it's wrong, but at least they called it analysis, and I don't have as much of a problem with it. So I really, truth in labeling is so important, I think, for all of the media. So I'm really glad you wrote the article and came on to talk about it, Ari. Ari Melbers from The Nation. Thanks for joining us.
I'm glad we could do this analysis, man.
There you go. Perfect. All right. Thanks,
you.
Ari. Okay. Now, before we let you go in this segment, I wanted to, he mentioned there about what the Yuval Levin had written about, and how the Obama had added to the deficits, et cetera, and then if he should just have pushed for more tax cuts. But in fact, he did, for $280 billion in tax cuts. The Washington Post had an interesting poll on health care, but also on Obama. I want to do health care in a minute, but first on the Obama's approval ratings, he's doing pretty well overall, but the one area that he's not doing so well in is 53% disapprove of his actions in regards to the federal budget deficit. Okay, so the conventional wisdom out there, 53% is not overwhelming, but a majority say that he's not doing well there. So the conventional wisdom, because the Republicans repeated and repeated, is that, well, Obama did blow up the deficit. I want to bring to your attention Bruce Bartlett's piece on this. He is a former advisor to Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and we had him on the show, and he says he's conservative, but you have to judge facts for what they are, and tax cuts make sense sometimes. It does in other cases. He's a very, very reasonable guy, and by all, from everything that I can say, I think he's actually an excellent economist from the analysis I've seen of his. So he wrote a piece saying, hey, look, we got to look at the real numbers here. If you look at the real numbers, they tell you a totally different picture than what is conventional wisdom. So I'm going to throw a couple of numbers at you here, but I think they're important. So let me be as clear as I can on them. First, he says, look, you can't just look at the deficit and say it's Obama's fault. Let's break it down into two categories. What was the deficit before Obama came in, and what is it after him? Okay, you can't argue with that. That makes perfect sense, right? And he says the projection in January of 2009, according to the Congressional Budget Office, before Obama came in, was that we would have $3.543 billion in outlays, but $2.357 billion in revenues coming in. So, bottom line, as Obama's coming in, we have a $1.186 billion deficit. Okay, so let's round up a little bit just to make it simpler. He's coming in, the revenues are not meeting our expenditures. He's in a $1.2 billion hole. Okay, so now, after he came in, what happened? Well, at the end of the fiscal year of 2009, which actually happens in September 30th because of the way they do their accounting, the deficit was not the projected $1.2 billion when he came in. It was actually $1.4 billion. So, hey, okay, 200 some odd million dollars more onto the deficit. So then you say, all right, well, do you at least pin that on Obama? So Bruce Bartlett breaks down the numbers a little more. And he says, all right, well, so let's figure out where that deficit came in, the extra deficit of $223 billion, right? Well, he says $28 billion was spending, but $251 billion was less than expected revenue. Okay, now if you kept all those numbers in your head, the extra deficit was only $223 billion. The money we lost on revenue was $251 billion. So that's actually a higher number, right? And he says from that you can conclude that in fact the increase in the deficit since January is 100% not because of higher spending, but because of lower revenues. And one of the reasons we got lower revenues is because Obama followed Bush's path, and at least for 95% of the country, not for the top 5%, but for the rest of us, in cutting taxes. So he says now the Republican proposal is, if he just cut taxes. But first of all, he did cut taxes. And tax cuts, unfortunately in this case, reduced revenue in fiscal year 2009 by $98 billion. So they didn't help our deficit. They might have helped stimulate the economy. You can have an argument about that, but they didn't help the deficit. And now the other part of the revenues being lower is, of course, because we're in a deep recession. So in the end, look, at the worst case scenario, you say, wow, you know what, Obama should have improved the economy and he should have found a way to increase the revenue anyway. He's the president. It's all on him. Okay, then he's responsible for $223 billion higher deficit, right? But definitely not $1.4 billion, because the $1.2 billion was in the beginning when he came in, right? But if you look at it reasonably, it's really that we've lost revenue because of the recession and because of the tax cuts, and that the extra spending didn't contribute to that, depending on how you look at the numbers, at all. So don't believe the hype when you hear people say, oh, Obama, man, $1.4 billion deficit. $1.2 billion is George Bush's, and we lost the extra $200 billion because of less revenue, not because we spent more. Okay, know the facts. Bruce Bartlett does a great job in explaining them here. Young Turks. Back on the Young Turks. All right, let me do some healthcare for you guys before I get to Lou Dobbs on O'Reilly, which is a lot of fun. I mentioned in the last segment there that the Washington Post had done a little poll on healthcare and Obama. The numbers for healthcare don't look so good. Yeah, they're mixed, actually. Right now, 48 to 49 people saying that they are opposed to the proposals overall. So that's almost a tie, but you're losing about a point. I think those are, honestly, a little discouraging numbers. Now, when you break it down, though, and you ask, how about the public option? People say, well, 53% are in favor of the public option for everybody, okay? So the public option, more popular than the overall health care reform. That's very important to keep in mind. But get a load of this. When they asked, hey, how about if it was a public option that's limited to those who like access to coverage through an employer or the Medicare or Medicaid systems, which is actually the public option that's in the bill. So the actual version of the public option that's in the bills, you know what that gets? 72% approval rating. After all of these attacks, after all the people saying, oh, it's not politically feasible to put the public option in there, it gets the version that's in the bill, it gets 72% approval rating. So much higher than the overall health care reform effort. People get it. It's going to lower your costs. And in fact, the number one issue that they pointed to as a problem in health care reform was they believed that it was going to raise the price of their premiums and raise the price of health care for everybody. So that's what they're scared to death of. If you want to alleviate that concern, the major concern, and raise the numbers for health care reform overall, you do the public option. Now, if they cared at all about what the American people believed, that would be absolutely clear. Now, they might care a hell of a lot more about what their lobbyists are telling them and who's contributing to their campaigns. But they should pay attention a little bit to the people who elected them. All right, one last thing, number out of that Washington Post poll. When asked, should there be banning of coverage for abortions for those receiving public subsidies, people actually said yes, 61% saying yes, there should be. But when asked, hey, how about if you segregated private money to use to cover abortion procedures, well, then the numbers flipped and said 56% saying, oh, you got to let people use private money to be able to get abortion coverage, even if they're getting subsidy for other coverage, okay? So that would lead you to believe that 56% of the country clearly against this two-pack amendment. So all the things that the conservatives are pushing, when you break down the numbers, are unpopular. The only reason why the overall effort is about 50-50 is because we keep conceding on those issues that are unpopular. and we keep letting the conservatives make the bill more costly and provide less coverage. And then that makes the overall bill less popular. Enough compromise. So that brings us perfectly to what Sherrod Brown has said. He's a senator from Ohio. He's one of the bigger progressives in the Senate. And he went on Maddow's program and a couple of other forums where he said, look, enough is enough here. Let me give you the quote from Senator Brown. He said, "We figure on the public option there's been a lot of compromise already. A large number of people in this country, including many, many doctors, wanted Medicare for all. That didn't happen. Then we wanted a strong public option tied to Medicare rates. Then we wanted a public option building the Medicare network. That didn't happen. Now we're saying that a public option coming out of the Health Committee. And now we're saying a public option with state opt-out. Where was the compromise coming from their side?" So he listed about 5 or 6 compromises there that the progressives have already made to water down the public option as much as possible. He said, okay, enough. That's it. No more compromise. There's no compromise from the other side. Why should we keep giving away the store? And they said, oh, what about Lieberman? He said, quote, "We're not going to let the tail wag the dog here." So we've got way too many senators on this side saying we got to have the public option. We've compromised too much already. And on the Stupak amendment, he said, no way. He says it's not conceivable that they could collect enough votes on the pro-life side to get the equivalent of the Stupak amendment passed in the Senate. So that's a positive sign if you think Sherrod Brown is right about his vote counting in the Senate. Meanwhile, Stupak himself, the so-called Democrat from Michigan, is saying in the House, if they strip my amendment away from the final bill, that's it. I'm going to try my damnedest to kill the bill overall. I've already got 10 to 20 Democrats on my side. I'm going to try to grab some more Democrats. And if we don't make sure that abortion is not allowed in any of these private or public plans that take part in the exchange, so if we don't do that, then I'm going to kill all of healthcare reform. So Bart Stupak, if he delivers on that promise, man, are you going to have some enemies, okay? Including the American people, because you just killed all of healthcare reform because, you couldn't get the rest of the Senate and the House to agree with you. He says, look, we won that vote. We won that vote. You did. You're right. And that's what I said on the day of. But now, though you go through the whole legislative process and you lose at the end, if you try to pull the plug on the whole thing, I think there's going to be a little bit of a hell to pay on that one. And then finally, Harkin, who's a Democratic senator from Iowa, says, look, enough is enough as well on this. If the Republicans want to filibuster everything, we're going to make them do it. So they say they want to read the whole health care bill. We're going to call their bluff. We want them in there 24 hours a day reading the bill. Okay? They want to pull these kind of shenanigans to try to slow things down, filibuster, do whatever they're going to do. Okay, have at it, Hoss. I want you in there. We're going to have a senator in there 24 hours. The minute you guys can't do it anymore, we're going to say, all right, end of the debate. Let's go to a vote. If that's true, that would be fantastic. Let's hope Harkin is right. All right, now, Lou Dobbs goes on O'Reilly's program, and he's going to explain what happened at CNN. I love how O'Reilly keeps prodding into why he might have been fired here. I'm sorry, decided to step down on his own. Clip number 5.
Now, for top story tonight, here he is, the recently emancipated Lou Dobbs. Okay, you still got your radio show 3 hours a day, and you're still popping off on there. But on CNN, you did quite well in the ratings when the immigration thing was in the forefront. And CNN actually moved you up from a fringe, they call it early fringe, to 7 o'clock because your ratings were strong.
Right.
Then your ratings leveled, as well as all the ratings for CNN began to go down. Just correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right.
So then they didn't like your anti-immigration stuff so much, did they?
I discern more of a difference between then, which was under the Bush administration, whom I was criticizing, and now, when it is the Obama administration, and an entirely different tone was taken. Not so much in the case of CNN management, certainly, because my contract was very explicit. I had absolute editorial control. What I reported is what I chose to report.
So they never said to you in the hallway, you know, we don't like this, or this doesn't make you or the network look good? You never got that kind of feedback?
Never. The only issue that came up in the last 90 days of my employment there was John Klein and I talked about the issue of opinion itself and advocacy journalism. He wanted to take the network in a different direction, and I quite understood that and tried to accommodate him, Bill.
But it doesn't make any sense. So let's just go back. Under
Sure.
the Bush administration, and President Bush didn't do a lot to stem illegal immigration until his last 2 years.
Yes,
So you hammered him.
Absolutely.
You hammered him. But at the same time, La Raza and other groups labeled you an anti-immigrant guy, not an anti-illegal immigrant guy, an anti-immigrant guy.
And so did, by the way, the New York Times, which conflated illegal immigration with
legal immigration.
Right.
So you were demonized by the left as a bad guy. You don't think CNN bought into that at all?
I don't. I really don't. But that's just purely subjective on my part. CNN's management never tried, and by the way, in 27 years, and this goes back to when Ted was running the operation, they never tried to.
And I believe you because, as I said, they moved you up in a time slot when your numbers were good. But then the numbers leveled and went down, and then a new president came in, and you're saying as soon as the new president came in and you went after him, not only on illegal immigration, but economic issues, they didn't like you anymore.
Well, I don't know whether that was the distinction that triggered any sort of response or a difference in perspective on the part of CNN's management, but it is the only difference between the way I was conducting myself under this administration and the previous administration.
But what did you hear? I mean, did you hear that they were uncomfortable with you?
No, what I heard very directly was that they had decided to take CNN in a direction in which advocacy journalism would not
Okay, so they just want an objective presentation in prime time. But it doesn't make any sense. Now, for top story tonight here.
All right, so O'Reilly went fishing about 4 times there. Come on, tell me about how CNN fired you because you were against Obama. Come on, tell me. And he's like, well, no, they just didn't want to do advocacy journalism. He said that about 4 times, and that's clear. That's from the record. Everything that CNN says, everything Lou Dobbs says, is that CNN didn't want to do any opinion. So that's what part of the reason they wanted to get rid of him. And the other reason is what O'Reilly brought up, lower ratings. Not because all of a sudden Obama comes in and they don't like you criticizing him. See, CNN is liberal. Oh, I didn't see you going there, O'Reilly. You were so deft and subtle. Okay, one more here. How about his stance on the birthers? Clip number 6.
Here's what I said about birthers, Bill. I said birthers have a question about a birth certificate. I personally believe that Barack Obama is a citizen of the United States. What I don't understand is that with Army officers refusing to serve in Afghanistan, with lawsuits going forward, why not just produce the doggone birth certificate and be done with it? That was my offense, to answer the question. And my question to you is, what kind of country is it when someone in the media asks a question and that becomes a controversy?
Well, if you're going to ask a question that Barack Obama doesn't want to answer, you're going to get hammered by the Obama people, and that's what happened. And it happened to the extent that you say you were shot at out in New Jersey where you live, right?
Well, it followed that shot at our house on a mid-morning.
Do you really believe that somebody shot at your house?
No, I know it.
You know it?
It's a demonstrable fact. And that followed months and months of threats on the issue of illegal immigration over our phones.
I get them too. I know what you're going through.
And it became a matter of some intensity in the last 2 or 3 months preceding that shot. And there are those who, what's interesting, on the far left, there are people saying, that just didn't happen. He made that up.
Yeah, there are.
Well, here is the conclusive evidence to my thinking and to my wife's. And that is the threat stopped on that very day that shot was fired. We haven't received a threat since then.
Wow, that is conclusive. Okay. Did you hear him there? I mean, there was a shot. Yeah, New Jersey State Police are like, yeah, it was fired from a long, long distance, probably one of the hunters in the area, which happens all the time where he's living. But none of people will investigate, right? And he's like, and then there are no threats after they take the shot, which I didn't report for weeks because I didn't think it was a big deal. But then later I wanted to make a big stink out of it and pretend I'm a victim. What? Come on, Lou. Come on. And you could tell from his nervous answer that he wasn't even buying what he was selling. All right. So that's Lou Dobbs on O'Reilly. Young Turks.